Okay, hopefully this will be a relatively short tutorial on how to go through the Lab 3A project, which is on page 177 in your textbook. And what we're going to be doing is doing some linear modeling, and we're going to be talking about something called a beta that has to do with stock prices. And we're going to use Yahoo Finance only because that was the one that they used in the textbook. If you know a different website that you can navigate with more ease than this, you can go ahead and pull the information from there. I'm sure you'll wind up with very similar reports. So at finance.yahoo.com, what you're going to do is go up into this area right here, and you're going to pull up a stock. And you can use any publicly traded company. I'm going to use Google today. But you could use anybody. And as you start typing in the name, if you don't know the symbol, which most of us probably don't know many of the symbols that they trade under, you'll see that it pops up. So I'm just going to pick Google right here. And sometimes you have to hit get quotes, and sometimes it just comes straight to the page. So it is in the middle of the day here. You see it's just before noon. So I'm getting a lot of movement. If you do this after a close, you may or may not see any movement. Pay close attention to this beta, because this is actually what we're going to find, but we're going to find it as a weekly beta, and I'm guessing this is probably a daily beta that they're calculating. What we're going to do is come over to the side here and click on Basic Chart, and then Historical Prices. And you're going to get a lot of prices through here. We want to look at weekly, and we're going to go back a year. I'm going to change this to 11. Change this to the 9th. Now this is just before the semester starts. Later on when you're doing this project in maybe September or October, you can use any year. I think this populates the exact last closing date. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Hit Get Prices, and you see all of your data comes up here. What it opened up, what high was for that week, what the low was for the week, what it closed at, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And this adjusted close, if I remember correctly, is because sometimes trades happen after we close here, and just in companies that make it in overnight and then overseas. It looks like none of these prices have really been adjusted as I scroll through fast, but we're going to scroll down and say download the spreadsheet. Open it up. I'll move this over a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for the percent of change from one week to the next. Now remember, percent of increase and decrease is new minus old over old. And we can use Excel to calculate all of this for us. So I'm going to click in H, and I'm going to hit equals, open parentheses, and I want the new price minus the old price as my numerator, and then I'm going to divide by the old price. New minus old divided by old. And then I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to get this percent of change. So I had a decrease of about 3%. Leave it in a decimal form. We don't need to do that 51 more times, thank goodness. I'm going to highlight this cell, and I'm going to come over to the corner, and see that little like boxy looking guy? If you put the cursor over it, it changes. See how it goes? It was fat and now it's skinny. So when it goes skinny, left click and hold it, and then drag it all the way down. And what it's going to do is update that formula for all the cells. So now if you click on this one, you see it says G55 over G54, and it will update everything. So now I have my change, and see this guy right here is in scientific notation, so there was pretty much no change. It was only a penny. This is for Google. I'm going to put Google right here just to make my life a little bit easier, because the next part we want to do is compare these individual prices to a larger database. I'm going to go back to Yahoo Finance, and I'm going to use the S&P 500. S&P 500 is 500 stocks that are traded, and they take the average, kind of like Dow Jones Industrial Average, which I think is 40 or 50. S&P uses 500. Click on that S&P. Same situation will come up. Notice there's no beta because it's an average for these stocks. And we want basic chart, historical prices. We still want weekly. We want to make sure that these dates are the same as before. So it was August 9th, 2011. I want weekly closings, and I want to get prices. And we have the same thing. So now when I scroll down and I say download the spreadsheet, another one's going to open up. Where am I? All right. And before I do anything, I'm going to highlight all of this. And I'm going to move it over to my other sheet and put it in. Move this over. And I'm going to change this date to S&P so that I remember who's who. Do the same thing over here. I want to talk about the change from week to week. It's new minus old divided by, oops, divided by old. And I'm going to click and drag this all the way down. And now I have those numbers. Now what I want to do is I want to use the increase or decrease from Google as my X. And I want to use my increase or decrease from the S&P as Y. And I'm going to use those as points. I'm going to make a scatter plot. Because what I'm thinking is what happens in here is going to affect what happens out here. Actually, let's reverse that. Google is Y, and S&P is X, right? Because it says on page 177, number 2, treat the percent of change in the S&P 500 as the independent and percent of change in the stock you chose as the dependent, right? Because this is the average. So what happens in here, we're saying what happens on the grand scheme and the market in general, we'll mimic that over here in our Google. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to copy and I'll paste it over there. And something didn't work out. Looks like our formulas didn't copy. So let's do this. Repeat the formula of new minus old divided by old. We'll confirm that those are the same. I just have a little bit of a longer float on this one. Drag it down. And now this is going to make it, you don't necessarily have to set it up this way, but it will make it a little bit easier to put our chart in. So now I'm going to come over, make a little bit of room. I got my X and my Y. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to come up to Insert, Scatter Plot, and I'm going to pick the first one. And there's my scatter plot. Now, let's make this a little bit bigger so that we can see what's going on. It looks like it's kind of hovering in the middle here. It doesn't really look very, I mean, it's kind of linear, but it doesn't really look terribly linear, right? It kind of looks like 1, 2, 3. Definitely looks like it may be a 4th degree to me because it kind of looks like an M shape. But we can figure out if it's a pretty good linear or not by highlighting the chart. Coming up to these chart layouts, if you click down, and now it's really kind of hard to see. You see how there's a super little tiny f of x on there? Click on that. And now you'll see we have a line of best fit and we have a least squares regression. Now that's not the correlation coefficient, that's the R squared. Correlation coefficient would be the square root of that, which is easy enough to find. R is going to be equal to the square root of 0.4293. 0.65-ish. And there's my line. And what we're looking for is our beta, and the beta, if I could spell it correctly, is a 0.9826, or your slope. So we read it is that my change in y every time the y, which was my Google price will go up about 98 cents for every $1 that the S&P goes up, right? Because it was y over x, change in y over change over x. So now that you have that information, what do you think about it? Is that beta good enough for you to invest in that stock? And since we do know, it's pre-calc, we know a little bit about correlation and what the correlation coefficient means. Is a 0.655 a good enough correlation for you to put in all your money for retirement into this Google? If this chart title bothers you, which it does bother me, you could change it. So what I would like to see in your document is your stock, your S&P. Make sure I have the dates. I'd like to see your chart. It would be kind of nice to see your R on the side. And then what you can do is just kind of go off to the other page. And I'll have this set up for you and type in. Do you think that this would be a good stock for you to invest in? Short term, long term? Why? Do you think the beta is a good choice? Do you think that the correlation is a good choice? And if you want to read a little bit about the beta, they did have, not at Coast to Coast, but beta on Wiki. So a little bit of information on it. If you've taken a little bit of stats, it may be a little bit easier to see, but if you can come down here, you can get an idea about what it means. And that is how you're going to go through your Chapter 3A project.